Welcome back. This is Loren Moss. Welcome back to Colombia Business News Recap. This edition, we're going to go in depth. We've done this before. It's great to have you back, Paul. It's great to have you back here recording with you, but it's also great to have you back from Ecuador. I think you just recently got back from the event that you just successfully finished in Ecuador. Not your first one, but I heard that it was well attended. Why don't you kind of give us, first of all, let me give you a proper introduction. We're here with Paul Harris of Colombia Gold Letter. Paul also is the organizer of Colombian Gold Symposium, the most important precious mining event here in Colombia. Happens every year. It usually happens in November, I think now, his publication is the most important publication specifically on the gold mining sector. He covers early stage mining. He covers the deals that are being done. They also get in depth technically. So if you understand the geology and things like that, they talk about that, and they talk about the going ons in the industry. So Paul is really, I would say, the authority from the media standpoint when it comes to the precious metals mining industry in Colombia, but not just Colombia, but in the Andes region, as well as we're going to find out you have some news for us regarding Mexico. So first, if you start out and kind of give us a recap on how things went this week in Ecuador.
Well, thank you very much, Loren. Great to be here and with your viewers again. Yes, at the start of the month we did the CGS Ecuador event, a two-day event focusing on the precious metals and copper sector there. It went very well. We had a really good program. We had over 200 people attending, and it was a very successful event, and so we're looking forward to the next one.
Great, that's good to hear. So now you've got you have the event coming up. We're recording this right now in late June. We're only a few months away from your annual Colombia event here in lovely Medellin. Why don't you tell us what we have in store for Medellin coming up this year?
That's right, Loren. CGS Colombia will be on the 7th and 8th of November at the Intercontinental Hotel, and it will be our 8th event, I think. So again, a two-day event focusing on the copper and gold exploration and development sector. A lot going on, a lot to talk about, particularly with the current government, which, whilst the current government is in favour of copper, it's perhaps not so hot on precious metals or coal for that matter. So many themes to talk about.
That's interesting, and let's get into that. But before we do, you always have the Medellin event, so that's good news, but it's not new news. You also have you have something else coming up in store, and tell us about your expansion.
That's right. We're in February, on the 6th and 7th of February, we're going to do our first event in Mexico, CGS Mexico, and that's going to be in Puerto Vallarta at the Marriott Hotel. We're really excited about that. In addition to copper and gold, we'll be talking about silver. Mexico's a big silver producer. There's a lot of exploration there. So CGS now means copper, gold, silver.
Oh, cool, great. Now, in Puerto Vallarta, Medellin is a lovely city, but we're kind of up in the mountains, and Puerto Vallarta is a beach city, if I'm not mistaken, too. So I'm sure they're going to be lovely cities there at the Marriott.
Yeah, we put a lot of work and effort into deciding where to host the event, because Mexico City perhaps is an obvious location. Cancun's obviously a big has got a lot of hotels, but the important thing for us was finding the type of hotel that can house our event, and so that means having an auditorium that can have 300 to 400 people plus space for an exhibition centre, and there isn't that many hotels that meet that criteria. We also wanted a location with good connectivity, so it's easy for people to get to, both from South America and from Canada and the US, and there's lots of direct flights to Canada and the US, plus February. Who doesn't want to escape the Canadian winter in February?
That's a good point, and I saw the growth even here, because you used to do the event at the lovely San Fernando Plaza, but it just got so big that now you're at the Intercontinental, which of course is another great hotel that has a lot of really important events. Now, you mentioned something a few minutes ago, and you talked about the ministry here. Now Colombia, we're less than a year into President Petro's 4-year term, and he just went through a big cabinet shakeup. But one of the ministers that kind of stayed put was his minister in charge of mining. And I don't know if that sends a message or if it's just something pragmatic, but what is your take now on kind of what the president's stance has been, or what we can determine from his actions in his first year towards the sector?
Well, that's a big question. I think that the starting point, Loren, is the president and his administration is not a fan of natural resource extraction per se.
Right.
He views it now, and going back into his political background, as the extractive sector has been responsible for many of the problems that Colombia has. That's his base position. So he's got a very strong bias against the petroleum sector and against the copper sector, the coal sector. And generally he thinks any mining, formal mining undertaken by foreign capital, his starting point is it's bad.
Right. Now, speaking of that, we also see this kind of conflict, and it's interesting how the government is handling it. Between Zijin and Continental up in Buriticá, about 4 hours from here by car. And that mine, even though it was developed very successfully by Continental Gold, by Aris and his team, since Zijin, which is a huge Chinese global mining company, took it over, things have kind of gone downhill for them. And the reasons might be complex, but it seems like the community relations have gone south, that they haven't had success with maintaining the cordial relations with the local government and the local artisanal miners. But now we see Zijin has been asking or demanding, however you want to frame it, for more intervention and more help from the Colombian government. That does not necessarily seem forthcoming. What's your take on that situation?
That's a very complicated situation. The social situation there has deteriorated because there has been a vast influx of illegal miners and criminal mining, and so that has changed the landscape of the community relations. And the government has basically left the company to its fate. The government hasn't really lifted a finger to stem or combat this rising tide of illegal and criminal mining, and it's got worse and worse. Obviously there's the economic loss to the company. I understand they can't get access to one of the richest parts of the deposit because they're underground miners, they drill and blast, and if they're drilling and blasting near where there's people, that's obviously not a good thing.
Right.
So the Vetasur area in particular, I don't think they can get to. More recently, presumably the illegal groups supporting the criminal mining there have been taking direct action against the company, and there's been incidents including the loss of life, and leading to Zijin to write an open letter to the president saying, look, you've got to sort this out, and still the government doesn't really seem to be responding. The government seems to have the attitude of, private sector, you're on your own.
How does this relate, if at all, to the strike and the civil unrest that we saw in that region, really more, I think, further north than where Buriticá is, but in the Bajo Cauca, the Lower Cauca region. Earlier, a couple months ago, there were strikes and there were protests. Some of them turned kind of violent, and there was, I guess, legitimate civil unrest, and you had military forces moving in. And I've heard conflicting reports. I'm not an expert on that. I've heard some people say that you had organized crime, the Plan de Golfo behind it, AGC maybe behind it, and others were saying, no, these people have legitimate beef, they're miners and things like that. I've really heard like 3 or 4 different conflicting stories. Is the Zijin or Buriticá situation tied to that? And whether it is or not, what was that whole situation all about?
I think yes and no. There's a lot of illegal mining in the Bajo Cauca as well. And there's a lot of criminal mining in the Bajo Cauca. I think there's often the conflation of issues or themes. There is legitimate ancestral traditional mining in Colombia that ranges from people panning for gold to people with a pickaxe scratching out a high grade vein. That's and a lot of the people involved in the protests are saying that's all they're doing. I think that's a bit disingenuous because there's a lot of capital behind that, and that's perhaps illegal capital. And so the government has been targeting some of these illegal mining or criminal mining operations, blowing up backhoes, blowing up dredges, sending the army in to stop that. And people are claiming traditional mining rights. There's no way that's traditional mining.
Right.
There's no way that's ancestral mining. So, but it is how they get a lot of people get their subsistence, and these people are voters. So, it's a complex situation. I think at a political level, President Petro, he comes from a left of centre background, sort of communist ideology, anti-capital ideology, and going back in time, his enemies, literally his enemies, were the autodefensas, which were a paramilitary organisations under the Uribe government that actively went out to persecute and kill left-leaning, communist-leaning people. So I think there's an element of the fact that Petro is perhaps doing some political score setting, because a lot of the criminal mining organisation in Baja Cauca is run, as you say, by some of the groups that in a previous life came from the autodefensas, which were right-wing paramilitary groups.
Very good point. I don't know if you were traveling or not last week when he in Berlin lamented the fall of the Berlin Wall, saying that it was a blow against workers' rights everywhere. I got some flack. Some people didn't believe he actually said that, and I had to provide the link to the speech.
He says some crazy things. He says some things that make a lot of sense, but he says a lot of crazy things as well.
I think that's politics these days anywhere. Now, there's some good news to talk about in the mining sector as well. You and I were both leading from Continental Zijin. The developers of that property, that project, are now down in Caldas, in Supía, working on another project in the very early exploratory phases, and we're talking about collective mining. You and I both got to visit. Really impressive. There's not a lot to see on the ground yet because they're still doing the exploratory drilling, but we got to talk to the mayor of the town, and just like we saw 6 or 7 years ago here in Antioquia, they start off, it seems like, by first laying the groundwork and establishing really good relationships with the local people. I had a great long interview. We haven't published it yet, but it's in editing right now, with the mayor of Supía. We talked to people there in the town. We talked to some people who were not just business representatives, but community representatives, and along with some really impressive finds that they're pulling up with the drilling. I've been impressed with the reception that they've gotten from the local community there. Now, maybe you can speak to more of what some of these findings mean, because I read in, high grade grammar, I look at that and it's like, okay,
different
all right, let me ask Paul what that means.
Well, I think, as a starting point in your initial comment there, as a starting point, you look at what the potential of a good mining project has for local, community and regional economic development. We're in a developing country, where central government hasn't historically invested a lot in the regions. They've been left to fend for themselves. So a good mining project can mean years and years of prosperity. The government take in Colombia for a mining project is, I think, 65-70%. Most of the money earned eventually stays here, stays here. And a lot of that is spent in the local community, particularly the exploration stage. All the money is being spent in the local opportunity. So the fact that Collective is employing, I don't know what the figure now is, but it's 50, 100 people. Most of those are locals. A lot of economic benefit from the exploration stage onwards generated for a community, increases the tax revenue base, which enables the mayor and other local officials to better plan and develop for their communities. Obviously, it gives people jobs and a source of income. So there's a lot of benefit. As you mentioned, the Collective team has a lot of experience doing this and doing this well at Buriticá before, and they've deployed a similar methodology in Supía, in Caldas. Now, obviously, it all ultimately depends on getting success with the drill bit and defining a project that's economic and feasible to produce. And from what we saw on the site visit, it certainly looks like they're getting there. We went to the drilling pads. We saw drill core being pulled, and it was just full of mineralization, very high grade mineralization. They're getting long intercepts. It's certainly, I think, the most exciting discovery in Latin America, if not further afield, this year, last year.
And also the infrastructure, I mean, the cost to build it out, you're not, sometimes with minings, as you know, you're in the middle of nowhere. You're in the middle of Nunavut or Yukon or somewhere out in the outback in Australia or something like that. This mine, I mean, it's not in the middle of a city, but it's actually close to infrastructure. It's close to, there are towns there. You're close to, you can fly into Pereira, you can fly into Manizales, you're close to international airports. I say close, I mean a couple hours. It's not like, around the corner, but still you're not in some remote area where you can't get infrastructure in and out of. Those are developed areas that already have industry, that have highways with the new 4G project. It's not like your development costs when it comes to logistics are going to be that high. And one thing that's always impressed me about how they operate, even when they developed a Continental, was the amount of local talent that they employ, and not just you go to some mines and you'll see they'll have the workers that are like digging the holes will be locals, but then all the geologists and all the executives are going to be from somewhere else. But I think the CEO of the project is a Colombian, a very experienced and qualified Colombian. They have Colombian geologists. The president. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry. But they've always been very good at making sure when they can find it. Now they bring in the world-class talent to do the project, but they also find the world-class talent that's kind of here on the ground. That seems to be part of their philosophy.
Absolutely. They employ, or they use specialist advisors that have a lot of knowledge. So in this instance, in terms of the geology, they've got David Redding, who's got long experience, and Dick Tosdale, who's a world-renowned porphyry expert. And part of that is to obviously help set the tone of where they're exploring and building the geological model, but also as mentoring and bringing up local talent. A key one that comes to mind would be Carlos Rios, who I think is basically head of the project exploration. Obviously being very, very successful there. And again, that's all part of the development opportunity of a responsible mining exploration and development company does. It's bringing on local talent to really help with the work. And the result of that for Collective is the Apollo discovery. That was a discovery that was made principally by the local geologists saying, look, this is a really interesting area, we need to drill here. And eventually the company put a hole in, and boom, the rest is history, as they say.
Wow.
Long intercepts from surface of high grade copper gold. I think there's some silver in there, some molybdenum. Very exciting stuff.
Now that's very close to Marmato, so let's talk about some of the other things that are going on, because there's a lot of different mining activities in Colombia. There's some mature projects, there are other projects that are kind of in the early stages, maybe not only, and I think that this ties in very much to what people can expect, and they ought to register and attend Colombia Gold Summit here in Medellin every year like we do. But let's talk about some of the other newsworthy things that you've been following, and some of the things that you might expect to go in depth with this November. What are some other developments that are happening?
Well, aside, we're Collective is already signed up to give a presentation. We're hopefully going to be able to do a site visit with them as well. As you mentioned, they're 5 kilometers from the Marmato project, which is Aris Mining. Aris is currently in the process of permitting to be able to build out their big underground mine project, which I think it's called Marmato Deeps, and that's that will be a very, very big project. They're in the final stages. They've kind of gone into radio silence, but we're hoping that they'll be able to get their permit, and therefore be able to sort of want to talk about their project and have that as a focal point within the conference in November. Hopefully they'll get their final permits and bits of paper before then. The other big question in terms of the sort of gold copper space is AngloGold Ashanti's Quebradona project. They had their permit application rejected, and so they're in the process of preparing a new permit. I imagine for them, the one of the key decisions they face is, do they resubmit that permit application during the current administration, or are they going to wait 3 years to be able to put that in with the next administration? I don't know the answer to that. Hopefully we'll be able to get them involved in the conference in some way to enlighten us about that. But the bigger picture, or the bigger story, may be the emerging copper story in Colombia. And this is important because, one, there's a worldwide shortage of copper coming. The project pipeline is very thin, so the world needs more copper projects. The government of Gustavo Petro recognises that copper has an important role to play in the energy transition, which he's a big proponent of, and he says that he wants copper mining in Colombia. That perhaps hasn't sort of trickled down to all the various different government officers and middle management yet, but it's an encouraging sign. And Colombia's going to have a very good copper story. There's been some good discoveries already in the sort of Choco-Medellin belt, with Rugby Mining and Minera Copper de Colombia. Collective, who we've mentioned already, they've got a copper component there. Quebradana's got a copper component. There's a number of other projects as well. So the copper future for Colombia is really quite exciting, and that could be what that means economically for Colombia cannot be understated, because if the government wants to move away from oil and gas and coal, it's going to need another big earner to prop up its budget, and copper could be that big earner.
Yeah, I see there's even some, and I don't know if there's a commercial potential, but I've heard that there is illegal activity with coltan, which is not copper, but it's another type of mining that's taking place down somewhere in the Amazon region. Not in a huge amount like you see in Africa or things like that, but in financially significant amounts. So I don't know, is there a potential for some of these other things like that are kind of feeding the new economy, as they say? We look at, obviously copper is a given. I don't know if Colombia has commercially accessible lithium deposits. We've heard about coltan. And Petro has said that he wants kind of to focus on this new, he wants to be part of this energy transition. We know that neighbors like Peru, further down south, Chile, are already participating in that with massive lithium mines. I think Bolivia as well. I don't know, you would have a better idea if lithium comes this far north with the geology, but what about lithium and coltan and some of these other types of products?
Okay, I'm not aware of any sort of lithium discoveries in Colombia yet.
I didn't think so.
But you mentioned coltan. Nobody's got a legal concession for that yet. That's something the government has retained the right to, but hasn't yet done anything with. There's a company, I think it's Auxico. They've got some rare earth projects, and they're putting in a plant in Santa Marta on the coast.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
Not just from Colombia, but bringing in feedstock from elsewhere. And of course, the energy transition relies on and depends on basic metals such as copper. Also zinc. Zijin's a big producer of zinc now as well, or a modest producer of zinc. Aris Mining, for its Segovia operations, I believe, is producing zinc as well. Colombia's got manganese, which is the other element when you're talking about lithium-ion batteries for EVs.
Yeah.
NCM is one of the main configurations, and the M there is manganese. Colombia has manganese. So Colombia has a lot of opportunity to be a big provider of materials for energy transition technologies. A lot more exploration needs to be done specifically for these things, because exploration in Colombia has traditionally focused on gold.
Right.
And let me also put the adjunct to gold in there as well. Silver. Silver is an energy transition metal too. It's a key component of photovoltaic cells. Colombia has got silver with Outcrop Gold, for example. Their Santa Ana project is primarily a silver project. A number of companies produce silver as a byproduct of the gold. Aris Mining does. Collective has it as well in their deposits. So all of these things are hopefully very good in terms of the sector being able to align with government aims.
Great. Well, hopefully we can go more in depth into all of these subtopics in November. So for people who want to find out, for people who want to register to attend the event, and it's worthwhile. There's a lot of events, some events people go to and they kind of go through the motions, but this event is really good, not just for the commercial aspect, for the academic aspect. I learn a bunch every time I'm there. I need to make sure I get into the geology session this time. Every year I miss it. There's some really good site visits that are associated with the event. The networking, of course, is great. And one of the things I always liked about it is that you can get value whether you're on the kind of the geology and technical side, and you're talking to the people who are there, well, they'll talk about the peripheries, and I finally know what that means. Or you can talk about the different, you wanted to talk to people who are telling you about their project, and they're telling you about the technical aspects of what they're finding. Those people are there. You have, we talk about ESG now, and the people who are talking about women in mining has always been a big component, and you always have people who talk about mining a lot of times gets a bad rep because you hear about when people make mistakes or just through bad policy do things wrong, but you don't get enough good attention to when people do it right. And you've done a good job of highlighting the people that do it right, and recognizing those efforts, whether they are environmental or working hand in hand with the local community. And a lot of mines, as you've demonstrated, have very harmonious and productive relationships, and you've highlighted some of those. And then also the financial side, the people that invest in mining, and that's kind of a very specific set of investors, and there's all kinds of different types of financing vehicles that I've learned about from your events, such as how people can finance mines based on the cash flows from them and things like that. And so there's something there for everybody. So if somebody wants to participate, how can they find out about the event? If they want to exhibit, how can they find out about the event? And then also, how can they sign up for your newsletter?
Excellent. Great question, and thank you very much for your kind comments, Loren. We've got a new website we've just launched called www.cgs.org, that's org.com, and that's got information about the Colombia event, the Ecuador event, and the Mexico event. There's an area there to sign up for the newsletter as well, and we'll be posting program updates there, the speaker bios as well.
Great, I'm looking forward to it. I'm there every year. Thank you for always having us. Count on our continued collaboration. And thank you for this insight that I think is going to be very valuable for a lot of our readers and viewers when it comes to mining in Colombia and in the broader Americas region. So thanks, Paul Harris. Always great to talk to you, and we wish you much continued success.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure as always.